Well, hello, everybody. This is Scott Anthony, Insight Senior Partner and lead author of our recently released book, Eat, Sleep, Innovate. I'm joined today, tonight, this morning, depending on where you're from. It is 1:03 a.m. in Singapore when we're recording this with Helen Eaton, the CEO of Settlement Music School. Helen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to have you with us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, and it is noon here in Philadelphia.
All right, fantastic. So let me just tell you a little bit about the video that you just saw. Let me introduce Helen, and then we're going to get into today's discussion. For those of you who have joined these Eat, Sleep, Innovate virtual book club discussions, you know the drill. I've got a bunch of questions that I've prepared for Helen, but would love to get questions from audience members as well. So at any point, feel free to type a question into the chat window, type it into the Q&A panel, and I will augment the questions that I have written up here with some of the questions from you. So the video that you just watched as we began this is a 14-year-old student at Settlement Music School. As mentioned, Settlement Music School CEO is with us today, Helen Eaton. Settlement was founded back in 1908. It has 6 physical branches and a new digital branch launched this year called Settlement Music Online, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, which has already grown to serve students in 7 US states. The school provides more than 10,000 weekly services as lessons, classes, and ensembles in music, dance, and creative arts therapy to students of all ages. In a typical year, and we know 2020 is anything but a typical year, and we'll talk about that too, Settlement collaborates with more than 50 community partners and provides $2.5 million in financial aid annually to 60% of its students from all around the Northeast of the United States. Helen became the CEO of Settlement Music School in 2010 and has earned significant notoriety in the industry for the broad transformation that she's driven at Settlement Music School. This year, she received one of the highest honors in the field, the Arts Education Award from the Americans for the Arts. So Helen, it is a true pleasure to have you as part of this discussion. So I want to go back in time a little bit. I said that you joined as the CEO of Settlement Music School back in 2010. So tell us a little bit about the organization that you encountered now 10 years ago.
Thank you, Scott. I'm just delighted to be here today. So 10 years ago, when I took over as CEO of Settlement, I found a legacy institution, at the time 102 years old, that had hundreds of thousands of students who had come through its doors. We often say that the story of Settlement is the story of Philadelphia. It's a story of immigration. As Settlement was founded out of the settlement house movement, welcoming immigrants and creating a home away from home. It's a story of multiple generations being part of the settlement family, which is very unique in our field. It's a story of arts and culture in the city. It's a story of community involvement, and it's a story of education. But I also saw an organization that was suffering great economic hardship, as many profits did a decade ago because of the economic downturn. I also saw an institution that had so many needs that it was difficult to manage all of the competing interests. I was also following an executive director who had been at the institution for 30 years. And so there was pervasive worry and anxiety over what the new person would do. So for decades, Settlement had delivered consistent, reliable results across the highest level of arts education, providing access and opportunity to all of these students by these outstanding teaching artists who were mostly classically trained. And as an organization, we were hardwired to maintain and extend that success model, which we have no doubt done over 100 years. As a consequence of continually focusing on that reliable and predictable success, Settlement's administration really didn't encourage any type of deviation or extensions of that core business model. Settlement was also not encouraged to move out of the box, albeit a very large box that Philadelphia's musical ecosystem had put us in. So essentially a reliance on the tried and true was keeping the school from accessing new stakeholders, new students, new revenue sources. And so following the core business model allowed Settlement always to ensure and anticipate results, but not creating new results. So to help encourage the diversification of revenue sources, really the diversification of activities, and ultimately help us become more efficient and more effective as an institution, we had to look to new models. We saw that inspiring innovation at all levels of the school could allow us to continue to deliver consistent and successful results from our core business, while at the same time encourage investment in extensions and innovations. And change management and community engagement became the vehicles to inspire this growth. We had our first consultancy within a site in 2012 when a really talented team from Boston came to work with us over a 9-month period. Insight offered their services pro bono. Thank you so much. And we took full advantage of this extraordinary opportunity. So that started us on the path for the next 8 years.
Right. One of the things that I just find so interesting about these conversations is, as part of this book club series, I've talked to people that are in for-profit organizations. I've talked to people in government organizations. Now, Helen, you run a not-for-profit organization, and everybody describes the same basic problem, this problem that we're organized to deliver consistent, reliable results. And that's a strength along one dimension, but it's a limitation and challenge along the other. And we often think that worlds are different, like the not-for-profit world is different than the commercial world is different than the government world. And of course, there are real differences, but that common thread of the challenge, the dilemmas, the things that hold us back when we innovate and grow is just really striking to me. So we're at about 2012. You've come in, you've gotten the feel of the place. We're doing some work together, and then you start this process that has led to a really transformed organization. So now tell us what happened over the course of the next 8 years and what things look like kind of pre-COVID in the beginning of 2020. Then we'll do a little bit of a spike into what's happened during this year.
Sounds good. So going back to the challenges of innovating at a legacy institution, which you're talking about, we had to find a way to really allow innovation to flourish without losing sight of the mission of settlement, which had carried us through generations of students. So from the beginning, you all recommended that we use a 50-30-20 framework. So 50% of our time should be spent on our core business and making sure that we continue to provide excellent service. 30% of our time should be spent on extending our core business, but still do what we know best. And 20% of our time should be spent on innovating. For us, it was exactly the right balance for us. It allowed us to make a substantial commitment to do innovative work, and at the same time, really dedicate ourselves to the programming that people knew we did so well. What I didn't understand at the time was just how powerful this framework was to create a level of comfort around the change that innovation brings. So by sharing with our longstanding faculty, staff, and board members that still 80% of settlement's time would be spent on our core business, the anxiety and fear that often accompanies change really wasn't there. It kind of allowed me to do the 20%. And at the same time, I was able to really inspire our creative staff members who were just chomping at the bit to do this type of work and say, there's a place for you here. We really want to invest in innovation, and we really welcome your ideas. So you all really helped us create these growth strategies and build our innovation capabilities. You helped us see that when we put the right systems, the right people, and the right structure in place, we could really transform what intentional innovation looks like. You really led us to redefine what we think of as success. And one of the greatest ways that we've seen this over the past 8 years is we started off thinking how we could be in service to our colleagues. We knew that as settlement, we had the knowledge, we had the capacity to lead citywide efforts, especially in support of equitable access for every child to quality music instruction. And this determination led us to create a citywide collaborative with 9 other institutions to support students from underrepresented communities who want to become professional classical musicians. This was supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. It's called the Philadelphia Music Alliance for Youth Artists Initiative, and we were the first in the country to do this. So kind of to summarize what we did in those 8 years is that we launched these citywide initiatives. We were able to grow our revenue by 50%. We diversified our revenue sources. We quintupled our community partnerships and we greatly increased our fundraising portfolio as well.
Awesome. It's incredible progress in 8 years. Now, Helen, I want to go off script. I want to ask you two questions that we didn't talk about in the pre-briefing before. So number one, music. You have a connection to music. What is your own background? I'm not going to ask you to play or anything, but you trained and you did used to play an instrument. Is that right?
I do. I play the viola, and I am not prepared to play today. I have to say settlement is more than a full-time job, so I haven't practiced recently, but my background is in viola performance, and I studied at Juilliard back in the 90s, and it was an amazing experience that actually really prepared me for a leadership role at Settlement.
And then the second question, how long have we known each other?
Oh my goodness, I think we have known each other probably since you were about 3 years old.
Yeah, 42 years. 42 years we've known each other. Helen and my sister are best friends. So that is one reason why we have this connection. And Michelle, if you ever watch the recording of this, I'm sure you're not watching it live. That's my sister, Michelle. It is actually your birthday here in Singapore as we've crossed midnight. So happy early birthday, sis. So those are, we'll get back to the regular questions, but always nice to have a little dose of humanity in as well. So I've got, I see there's a question that's come in the chat that I'll get in just a second, and keep getting questions in chat or Q&A. We'll make sure we get them. I want one more question just to tell the full story. So of course, this year we've been in the middle of a pandemic. Historically, Settlement taught its classes in physical branches. That obviously is a challenge when you're in the middle of a pandemic. So Helen, I want to play a short little YouTube clip. We'll see how seamlessly I can do this, and have you tell us what's going on in the video clip. So let's see if I can get this to work. I'm gonna go here, press share, make sure my sound is being shared, play this. And for this, you won a Best Affiliate Award for the best way, I think, to get parents a little bit of free time, which is a vital thing in the midst of what we're going through right now. Tell us a little bit about Settlement Online.
Sure. So that is a video that we did in-house. When we launched Settlement Music Online, we decided to take a little bit of what we learned from NSI, which is just get started, to not sit and wait till everything's perfect. And I have to say that was the terrific work of our Associate Director of Marketing and PR, Bobby Consolatore. So we were thrilled, and we've gotten terrific feedback around this video and around the promotion of Settlement Music Online. So I'll take you back to how it all started. So our COVID story, when COVID hit, our #1 priority was our people. I sat down with my CFO, I sat down with my board and all of our leadership team and said, it's got to be the people. And we have to focus on access and equity for our students. So several weeks prior to closing, I had what now I realize is the very good fortune of having a father who works as a scientific researcher, who let me know that this was going to be a huge thing coming our way. So we did start preparing a few weeks early. And so within I think it was about 2 days from when we closed, we launched all of our online teaching. So we got 170 musicians trained in distance learning, literally in a matter of days. We developed a tech team of 15 staff members who started training our faculty to do this in-person teaching. We had faculty members, Scott, who had never even turned on a computer before. Master teaching artists, incredible in their craft, but they refused to turn on a computer. Well, they got up so quickly through all of our mentoring. We even dropped computers off at their homes to get them started. We were what you would call customer obsessed. We were absolutely determined to remove every barrier for our students so that they could fully participate and not stop their music lessons and not stop that incredible connection that they had with their teachers. We honor the diversity of our student population, and we translated all of our distance learning handbooks into 6 languages. We put it up on our website for easy access. We created lessons that were both live and pre-recorded to address the issues of families who might only have one device in their house. So we really did, I think, a terrific job in removing those barriers. You referenced Philly, the Best of Philly, which is a coveted award in our region. And we realized very quickly also, as we were planning for closing for in-person instruction, that we needed to give back to our community, that it would be promoting settlement music online, but we also needed to really lean into our customers, who are our students, and get them engaged as quickly and as easily as possible. So we launched free programming through our Settlement Live series, both for kids, and we did adult programs as well. We really felt that we needed to be in service to our community. And because of that, for our Kids Live series, we won the Best of Philly. And we've had 31,000 views now on that series, which is really exciting for us. Then we had, once again, the great good fortune of having Innosight come in and offer us another pro bono consulting project. And you all really helped us. This time it was a team from Singapore. And you helped us launch Settlement Music Online to really develop it. So for 10 days, we worked on program development with a focus on the intersection of what we could offer and the jobs to be done for the consumer. So we asked the question, what does the consumer really need, and how do we respond to this? Our program staff came back with 18 programmatic ideas to your team, and together we prioritized what really needed to happen in order to move settlement music online forward. We are now in 7 states, and every single week we're adding on more students. So we're really pleased with how it's going.
Fantastic. Well, it's amazing to see the progress you made in a short period of time. And I love the beginning of that story. I mean, of course, no one loves what this world has gone through this year, but the idea of being able to flip on virtual classes within a couple of days, with the idea of scrambling to make sure that people have the equipment to be able to provide those lessons to people all around the world. These are the kind of stories that exist all around the world in March, April, and May of this year. It's kind of everyday innovation heroes that kept the world turning, that kept our children learning, that kept our supply chains moving, and allowed us to get through something where really, really worse things could have happened. So it's always great to hear those kinds of stories. Helen, we've got a couple of questions in the chat that I want to pull out. One of them docks into what we were going to talk about next, but I want to go back to a question from CA. And I'm going to read the question, then I'm going to reframe it, as I want to make a comment on it, but I want to ask you a different question off of it. So the question, does the 50-30-20 framework change with the size of the company and budget investment? I'll offer a general perspective on that, but before that, I was curious about the 20% for you. Is, you're not an organization that's got thousands of people where you can have a kind of dedicated department do this. What does 20% mean when you're kind of a smaller not-for-profit organization? Is that 20% of everybody? Do you pick a couple people? Is it your own time? What did 20% actually translate into for you? Because, a question we get asked a lot from smaller organizations is, this sounds great, but I just don't have the bandwidth to do it. How do you find that in a circumstance like yours?
Well, I think it's about the discipline around doing this type of work. It does not include every single employee. We have 300 employees, and not every single person works on innovation. We like to think of it as an opportunity for people who are really excited about this work to get involved. So we started a committee called Moving the Big Ideas Forward. And it went across all departments at Settlement. It was not just one department. It wasn't just the executive office. And that was really important. So you could really have a diversity of thought around the table. But we created the discipline to meet on a weekly basis. So we would hold these meetings. They went on for several years till we really got the hang of always thinking about innovation, about how we could respond to our community in a really thoughtful way. But I think it was that way of organizing the thinking that enabled us to move things forward.
Great. So then let me make the general comment to the question, does it change with the size of company and budget investment? Well, from our point of view, it really depends on what your strategic objectives are and what your circumstance is. So if you're in a circumstance where there's just a huge amount of tailwind in what you're currently doing, and you see a clear path to achieve your strategic objectives and your growth objectives, just doing what you're currently doing better, faster, more efficiently, and so on, well, then you might have a higher number at the beginning and a lower number at the end. If you're at a circumstance where there's change ripping through your organization, where there's a massive gap between your current achievements and your future aspiration, and you really have to put your pedal on the innovation or put your foot on the innovation pedal, well, then you might have a higher number as you get to the more innovative part of the equation. So it really is pretty circumstance contingent. The general rule of thumb we offer people is in almost every case, more than half of your effort is going to be what you're currently doing. Usually that's just a smart, sensible thing for an organization to do. And you want at least 10% of your effort to be the stuff that is going to push the frontier to some degree. And different organizations have different names for these types of things, but that's just a general rule of thumb. Again, the answer, specific answer, is going to be really circumstance contingent. And then Helen, we got a question from Dagmar in Germany, which is great. Thank you for the question. That said, what made this obsession? You were talking about customer obsession when the question came in. What made it possible? And this connects it into where you appear in the book. So in Eat, Sleep, Innovate, the Settlement Music School appears in chapter 5. And chapter 5 talks about how you go about discovering opportunities. And we make the case that curiosity and customer obsession are keys to reliably going to discover opportunities. So what does customer obsession look like? How did you make this a habit inside Settlement Music School? Because it wasn't a habit when you arrived 10 years ago, I think it's fair to say.
Thanks. So I'd say that we've been really lucky as an institution to be filled with curious people. I mean, artists by nature are lifelong learners. So when we learned now 8 years ago about an approach that you called Future Back, it really became the foundation for us in any type of long-term planning. I really wanted to share this quote, if this is okay, because this is how much I love Future Back. Is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so it's a quote from you all. You and your team undertake an effort to actively, intensively, and imaginatively immerse yourself in your organization's likely future environment so you can determine what you must do to thrive in it. Then you walk that vision back to the present in the form of concrete initiatives. So the reason I'm such a champion of Future Back is that I discovered that by talking about the world 10 years from now, it allowed us to bring our best creativity and natural curiosity to the table without anxiety because, well, 10 years is a long time from now. So it was much easier for people to talk freely about how they imagine the world. And it allowed us to put the customer front and center because, well, what's more interesting than talking about people's vision on what the world's going to be like and how our students are going to learn 10 years from now? It was such an incredibly appealing topic to our faculty and to our staff. Typically in our world, most small businesses and nonprofits do something called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I just want you to picture, imagine what it's like to be a staff member walking into a strategic planning meeting with your board members and your supervisors, and you start this really painful process of discovering your department's weaknesses and threats, which is the W and the T in SWOT. And it's really enough to make anyone want to hide below the table, or I guess now it's hiding underneath the computer screen. But with Future Back, I found that it brought a lot of joy and fun to the process. It really allows us to create a safe and a brave space to really be creative and to respond to know what we know is going to happen, which is change. So with our Future Back, we really started thinking about how Settlement would need to expand our customer base and how we could reach them even beyond our branch doors. So we asked ourselves in 2017, who will our students be in 2027 and how can we stay relevant? And from that is really our focus on community partnerships. What's important to know is that our partnerships not only grew in number, but the programs expanded exponentially in terms of the scope of offerings. We learned to start every potential meeting with a community partner. This I learned from our director of education, who's fabulous, Karen Ornstein. What would you like your students to have as being part of Settlement Music School? What experience do you want them to have? We would ask our partner. And so we've moved away from just offering classical music to rock bands, music technology, production, songwriting, and we now even offer bucket drumming. So I think that this is a whole other approach and a whole other way of thinking about our work and really responding to the community, staying relevant and being customer obsessed.
Great. Well, you signed me up for the bucket drumming course. I have to get the right buckets. I don't even know if they sell those in Singapore, but I think that would be a very interesting virtual class to take. So
it's actually, you make your own bucket first, which is even more fun as a kid.
Well, my 4-year-old Teddy, I think I'll not tell him about that, because I think we would then have bucket sounds ringing through the house, and maybe there's enough noise there already. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So again, I'll remind people, if there are other questions that you have, please type them into the chat window or hit the Q&A button and type them in. I've got plenty of questions to take us until end of time, but if you've got something, please don't sit on it. But Helen, I want to go to one of my favorite lines from you in the book, where you said, the theories, the ideas, the concepts, they all work no matter how large or small your organization. They are motivating and inspiring, which was motivating and inspiring to read. So of course, we have a very biased viewpoint. We agree. We think that the theories, models, approaches that we describe in Eat, Sleep, Innovate, and in all the other work that the Insight team has done are practical, proven ways to address some of the dilemmas of innovation and growth. But I'd love to ask a couple questions related to that quote. So the first one is, of the theories and models, which is the one, and I can kind of guess based on what you said so far you're going to say to this, but which is the one that you found most helpful as you've led Settlement through this transformation over the past 10 years?
Sure. I actually want to say that I really do love all five, which is why I'm such a big fan of the book. But one that really resonates with me, where I'm constantly challenging myself, is actually empowerment. So if we start with the fact that I'm sold on all the other four, and I've talked about curiosity and customer obsession. I would say empowerment has been a really interesting one for me personally. We have a shared leadership model at Settlement. And I've made every effort to develop and really support this model because it truly works. Everything good that has happened since COVID hit is the result of a team effort with our staff, our board, our faculty. And they have really been leading the institution with me. So it's taken consistent, regular meetings with all of our administrators at all levels, where we encourage every voice to be heard. We've not shied away from strong opinions and disagreements. But I think what is actually really challenging when you do have a shared leadership model is to ensure that it's actually happening in every part of your organization, that everyone actually follows that model. So I question whether I'm being a good enough teacher, whether I'm being a good enough mentor to our staff to make sure that they are actually practicing that with their own staff. So it is something that's top of mind for me. And one of the things that I just want to say that I really appreciate are the concrete examples that you give in the book about putting these practices into place. And one of my favorite ones is the behavior blockers. And I would just like to share just a little bit about that, because I think the strategies that you put forward could really work for any organization, big or small. And our goal is to follow one behavior, but sometimes that doesn't always work that way. And one of the biggest areas that an arts organization like Settlement can suffer from are the ridiculously high standards around creativity. That somehow people don't think that the idea is good enough because it is not the newest idea. And so to really reinforce this idea that something different creates value, doing something different that creates value is what innovation is really about. And I keep saying that over and over again to my staff to really get them to open up and share what their ideas are, because they're wonderful. So trying to make sure that they don't really prevent themselves from bringing their best creative self to the table is certainly a challenge.
I've got a couple comments that I want to add based on what you described here. So first, for those of you listening, Helen mentioned the five. Those are the five behaviors that we detail in the book. Excuse me, the five behaviors that drive innovation success. Sorry, I'm choked up thinking about the five behaviors. So the five behaviors that we mentioned in the book are curiosity, questioning the status quo, looking for different and better ways to do things, customer obsession. If you're going to do something different that creates value, you have to solve a problem that matters. So you have to find, if you know Insight, the job to be done that's not done well. We talk about the importance of being collaborative, recognizing that none of us is as smart as all of us. So you want to find ways to bring people together and ideas together, because innovation magic happens at intersections. We talk about being adept in ambiguity, recognizing that a first idea will necessarily be partially right and partially wrong. You want to do exactly what Helen described they did with Settlement Music Online, where you get a first good enough version out there and you learn your way to success. And you heard Helen's favorite, being empowered, because of course you can't do something different that creates value unless you actually go and do something. And then this idea, Helen, that you mentioned about people setting really high bars, it's something that we see all the time. It's one of the reasons why our definition has the word different in it, as opposed to a breakthrough or a leap forward. Because a mistake people make is they think, well, if it's not a hypersonic plane or a world-saving vaccine, it doesn't count. And of course, we need those things. Those things are great, of course, don't get me wrong, but the day-to-day, everyday stuff counts as well. And we had a fun little activity at home that, if you're looking for something to just throw another conversation into your home over the holiday period, you can try it out. Not just you, Helen, the people listening, the people who are watching the recording. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the rare privilege to go and address a bunch of fourth grade students, which is a ton of fun. My 9-year-old son, Harry's in fourth grade here in Singapore. And it was, they're doing a unit on innovation. So I gamely volunteered to come and be a guest lecturer. And you, of course, have to think really hard about how you're going to communicate these ideas to fourth graders, because it can go way over their head, but they know when you're talking down to them and they don't like that. So one of the things that we did to get ready for it is we just had a family discussion about where have we seen people in and around our family do something different that created value. So we talked about Holly, my 12-year-old daughter. A couple of years ago, she was in an entrepreneurial contest in Singapore, and she and her friend came up with an idea called Generation Connections, which was the platform to connect kids and grandparents. Harry has invented Harrylandia. Harrylandia is a mythical land where he is the king and god, and he has all the creative flourishes you could imagine a 9-year-old would have. When Singapore went into its circuit breaker, don't call it a lockdown, in April of May of this year, it coincided with the kids going on spring break. So Charlie, my 15-year-old, came up with Camp Bonk, which was a way for the kids to be entertained with a full schedule and all that. And going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, my nephew Bryce in Colorado came up with a very innovative idea called the CAN campaign. The idea is, instead of giving money to homeless people in the Colorado area in which he lives with my sister and Helen's friend, Michelle, you give homeless people food that they can eat in cans. And like a good innovator, Bryce pivoted. The first version of the idea didn't realize that you need to give cans that can be easily opened. So rather than carrying around can openers, Pop Tops were the answer to that. All relatively simple things, but always to do something different that created value. And once you realize these things are in and around your family, once you realize these are things that you and your colleagues have done at work, it makes it that much simpler. It makes it that much safer for people to go and bring their ideas forward. So while you're swapping presents over the holiday season, maybe you can swap a few innovation stories as well. So I wanted to add that as well. So Helen, coming back to this point about being in the arts environment and high hurdles, it's interesting. I was reflecting on the conversation now. We've got about 8 minutes left or so. If I didn't know you were at a not-for-profit organization, from the way you talked about everything, you could be at any kind of organization. But not-for-profit organizations are unique. They're different. As you think about innovation in the context you're in, what makes it harder in a not-for-profit context, and what maybe makes it easier?
Sure. Um, I would say that one of the biggest differences is that we have a very important constituency in our donors. Settlement has 1,500 donors on an annual basis. So that's 1,500 people who really need to understand how the school works, how we operate, what we believe, and are we really always staying true to our mission? Very rarely does the bottom line of our financials enter into discussions with donors. Of course, they want you to be doing well with your finances and be able to meet your mission, but mostly they're concerned about the effect that we're having on our students and our faculty and how we're really growing the arts and cultural community and the education community in Philadelphia. Um, so another area that is really different is how do you tell that story, right? It's a really important story that you need to tell your donors to make sure that they're still supporting your organization with those much, much needed funds, and who tells this story. So the obvious answer is the fundraising department, but the not so obvious answer is our communications department. And in a really well-run nonprofit, the communications department just cannot be siloed from all the other activities of the organization. And they must be among your best and brightest. They must be connected to everything that is happening, any new developments that are happening in programming, responses that the institution needs to give of anything that's happening locally, nationally, or even internationally. They really are PR, marketing, and all outward communications rolled into one. They have to have their finger on the pulse. They really are the zeitgeist of our communities. And so I think that's a very important thing, to not silo such an important department, but to really have them work hand in hand with the executive office and the programming department all the time.
You know, it's interesting. Again, one of the great privileges of putting this book together, along with my colleagues Natalie Paincho and Andy Parker and Paul Cobb from DBS Bank, is we just got this opportunity to look at all these rich case studies from very different places and look for common threads. And here's the thread. You know, we had Barclay Cox doing a discussion like this, the CEO of King & Woods Mallison, which is a leading law firm in Australia. And he was talking about the importance of communication and how he couldn't silo communication, and how communication for the change effort that he was driving was so absolutely critical. Completely different organization, 10,000 miles away from yours, in just a really different context. But the answer is kind of the same answer. I think, again, an important reminder for folks. We all look at the uniqueness of our organizations, and they are all unique. That uniqueness is beautiful, but also look for the common threads that connect them. So Helen, then a last question for you in this notion of applying these ideas in the context you're in. Your organization is 112 years old. How does it feel to try and innovate? I mean, I imagine on the one hand, you've got history and heritage to lean on. On the other hand, you know, you don't want to be the one who screws it up. So what is it like innovating in an organization with that much history?
I would say scary if it's not done right. That we have faculty and board members and staff who've devoted their entire lives to settlement. We had a board member who passed away this past spring who'd been involved with the school for 80 years. He started when he was 14 years old as a student. And so if that's not commitment, I don't know what is. And I think it's so critical that when you work at a legacy institution like Settlement, you have to listen to your constituency and really listen carefully. Make sure that your people feel heard, that you acknowledge that change is difficult and that change can make people anxious. Take the time to really understand what it is they're worried about. Make sure that they know that your door is always open. Make sure that you acknowledge when something has gone really well because of change, and really make sure that those staff members feel supported and let them know how they can benefit from the change. And if change results in somebody losing out on something, you need to be the person to share that with the person who's quote unquote losing out. If there's something that they're not going to get to do in the same way moving forward, never abdicate that responsibility. It's a key piece of the job, no matter how miserable it might make you to have those discussions. It's an important discussion to have, and it builds trust with your community.
Well, I've got one last real question to ask you, and then I'll give you one fun, unscripted question for the last question. But the last real question is, if you could go back in time, 2010, and you could whisper in your ear, give you some advice, Helen, don't do or do this. What advice would you give the 10-year-old, a 10-year younger you?
Okay, I would definitely say get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Absolutely. Embrace the unknown. And I think to lead people through massive change, really make sure that you embrace and become good friends with the person who's willing to tell you the things you don't want to hear. That is so important, and reward that when they do.
Fantastic. Well, Helen, you've given us a ton of actionable insight as we've gone through the discussion here. And the thing that I appreciated when we reconnected in a professional context is, again, just how similar what you talk about is to what Barclay Cox talked about at KWM, what Ed Catmull talked about at Pixar, what we heard from Mel Filler at Johnson & Johnson. Very different organizations, very different contexts, very different geographies, all grappling with the same challenges, all seeking to realize the same opportunities. So then the fun question that I'll have us leave this discussion with, do you have a pandemic guilty pleasure that you're willing to admit that you have done during 2020, that had a little bit of fun during 2020, despite all the bad things that have happened this year? A TV show, a thing that you've done. We did this with the team, and somebody admitted they gotten kind of hooked on TikTok. I admitted that I didn't mind having a glass of wine at the end of an evening like this. One is waiting for me once this ends. You have a pandemic guilty pleasure you're willing to share?
I would say my husband and I have subscribed to every possible channel there is to see of TV series, like no holds barred. So yes, every night we relax. We turn off our iPhones. We just relax and watch great series from all over the world. So we're huge fans. My husband's French, and we watch all these fabulous French TV series that we've never watched. It's really, really fun and really relaxing.
Have you watched any Korean dramas? Korean dramas were another guilty pleasure that came up. If you haven't watched the Korean dramas, I have not, but I've heard they are massively addictive.
Okay, I can't wait. I
All
can't
right.
wait.
There we go. Well, again, thanks for joining us, Helen, and thanks everybody for all the questions, and appreciate the nice book that you've got on display there, Helen, and keep fighting the good innovation fight. And we look forward to hearing more great things from Settlement Music School. Best of Philly and beyond.
Thanks, Scott. It was really terrific to be here today, and I really appreciate all the support you've given to Settlement.
All right. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining. Take care now.
All righty.